I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to have some fun with vocals. Now, it's possible that you're like me in that you can't sing a note. I'm not a singer, but it's also true that an enormous amount of music, we kind of latch onto it and we're drawn to it because of the vocal component. And so, is there a way in which we can get vocals into our projects without having to use sample libraries or without having to raid the Apple Loops library for its kind of vocal loops, that maybe allow us to experiment with alternative ways of generating vocal phrases? Well, I think there is. And it's the idea of being able to process spoken word vocals to see whether or not we can extract pitch or imply a pitch or begin to find little bits of phrases that maybe we can build tracks around. Now, what I've done is to record this phrase using a microphone just into my through my audio interface.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Because we're going to see what we can do with vocal transformation. Okay, so what we've got is this vocal track, and you can see that down in the bottom left-hand corner I haven't got any processing on this at all. Now, one thing that I discovered a little while ago that's a lot of fun is obviously the pitch folder and the idea of pitch correction. Now, within Logic Pro, if we're actually working with a vocalist and we're recording vocals, we know that flex pitch allows us to apply a kind of auto-tune or Melodyne style sort of series of processes to bring pitches in line. We can correct individual notes that are out of tune, and we can change vibrato, and we can do all sorts of things. But there are plugins that allow us to go after some of those things too, and pitch correction is of course one of those. Except that surely there isn't any pitch in this phrase because it's spoken word. Well, that's kind of true. If I decide to keep every single note on, in other words, ask Logic to tune each note that I've played to the nearest semitone, this should actually sound more or less exactly the same.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
But what we can actually see in the interface is that actually Logic is detecting the pitch of the notes that I've spoken, and it's kind of flying around and it's kind of tuning them, but of course, because every note is available, not a lot is changing. So what if what I do is to say, okay, well actually I'm going to just limit myself to one note. Let's pick D for a moment, just to see what happens. Now, as you can see, over on the right-hand side, I've got a chance to choose the response time of how quickly Logic will tune this phrase to the note D. And at the moment, there's a sort of natural-ish response time. But if I make this super fast, in other words, I'm asking Logic to tune it immediately, I think we'll end up with a slightly bolder result. Let's just hear what that sounds like.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Okay, and suddenly this phrase is getting processed with all this kind of hypertuning.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Now, why did I pick D? Well, I think from long experiments that my spoken voice is kind of around the pitch A a little bit more. It might sound like a crazy thing to say, but if I press play now, I don't think that this phrase is going to jump around between octaves in quite the same way that it does with D, because A is kind of the middle of my speaking voice range.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
So we get that little variation towards the kind of S sound, but otherwise the note sticks much closer to one octave here than it does when I come to kind of the other end of the octave spectrum. D's quite a long way away from A, and as a result, Logic's trying to decide whether or not to drop to the D below the natural range of my voice or to jump to the D above it, and as a result we get these interesting little octave switches.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
And I think that might stand us in quite good stead. So immediately what we've discovered is that pitch correction has the potential to tune not just sung phrases, but spoken ones as well. Okay, so let's just leave that for a moment. I'm going to bypass that plugin and I'm going to come down to the pitch folder again. And this time what I'm going to do is to actually come to Vocal Transformer. Now this is a different plugin. Let's just make this a little bit larger. Okay, that's at maximum size. So let's just have a look at what this plugin can do. Now this is a little bit more like Soundtoy's Little Alter Boy. What we've effectively got is a plugin which allows us to change two things. Firstly, just overall pitch, and at the same time, formant. So what is a pitch change? Well, that's straightforward. If I press play on this phrase, and in fact, let's just put a little loop around it for a moment, we can adjust pitch, and I think we'll hear it changing in ways we're expecting it to.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
There we are, I need to clear my throat. Okay, now that's pitch change. Okay, that makes sense. But what we've also got is this formant control. Now formants are a little bit like harmonics, I guess. If we were to take a pitch of a note and we were to sort of analyze its sort of structure from a sort of harmonics point of view, what formants allow us to do is to change those overtones so that effectively what we're doing is we're just either sort of bringing them down or enhancing them. So effectively we get this either this kind of change in tone, which isn't so much a pitch change, but more a character change.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Have you seen Alvin and the Chipmunks? Okay, so what we've got is this idea of being able to play with these two separate parameters, and we've got our mix dial down at the bottom. So if what I wanted to do was be to say, okay, well, I want mostly my voice to sound like my voice, but it'd be quite fun to add a few little sort of formant overtones as well, I can.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
So this is another really powerful way of being able to work with these plugins that, again, if I was working with a sung vocal and I decided that I wanted to kind of create a little harmony, an octave higher, with a little bit of extra formant change and just to slightly back down the mix level so that there's just a little hint of that, I can do that. But of course I can do that on spoken vocals too.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
And now it kind of sounds like there are two of me, one of which has got a slightly different tone, a different character, and suddenly the whole thing has just got a bit extended and a bit stretched. Okay, fine. Now, there's also this Robotize feature within Vocal Transformer, which basically, rather than tracking pitch, fixes a specific pitch on the vocal. And what I can do is to choose that here. I've got an opportunity to decide what the pitch base is going to be, and this is going to give me a very different sound. If I take the pitch and formant down, we'll get a kind of much more robot-y kind of approach.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do.
Now what I can do with the pitch base is to basically choose the middle of the pitch, and it was sort of set at around A, and effectively this is a sort of detection algorithm for saying, okay, what is the pitch base? What's the pitch at which you want me to analyze this? Logic asking me that question, and then obviously if I wanted to choose a different pitch, I can select it here. So if again I wanted to keep working in D, having used this is the kind of middle of the detection, I can then set the pitch I want it to be.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Okay, so we're beginning to see what we can do with vocal transformation. Sorry, I'm finding that irresistible. Okay, so we've got our vocal transformer and we've got our pitch corrector. And if we use both of them together,
let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation. Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
So straight away, what I'm doing now is to use this mix dial or slider as a means to kind of blend this overtone. So in other words, what I've got is the kind of pitch base being established by pitch correction at D. And then what I'm doing is I'm adding this A, 7 semitones higher. And of course, if I set the mix slider all the way across to the wet end, we're only going to hear one effect completely being transformed by the other. Whereas of course, if I set the mix dial somewhere else, we're getting some of the original pitch correction with these overtones being overlaid on the top as well. So how might I bring these kind of ideas into a musical project? Well, of course, the other thing that I can do is to start putting a phrase like this up against a beat loop to see whether or not there's a natural sense of rhythm, whether or not I can instill a sense of rhythm on it in some way, whether that's the entire phrase or just a section of it. Let's have a listen. So I've just brought in a beat loop. I made this a little bit earlier, but I haven't in any way thought about tempo. We're just working at the default tempo within Logic. Let's just see how these two things sound together.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is to actually adjust the volume balance. Before these two things happen, what I'm actually going to do is to bring in a bit of compression, and we'll choose a VCA compressor just so we get a lot of immediate response time. I want this to speak quite quickly, and VCA compressors are great for fast response. And what I want going to do is obviously set my output level of choice, but I want a kind of more compressed, more even sort of vocal, and I want it to be a bit louder overall.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Okay, so it feels like the end of that phrase. Let's just put the very first note right on the down beat of the bar and just see if there's a rhythm emerging somehow.
Let's see what we can do with vocal transformation.
Okay, well this last bit over here definitely feels like it's got some rhythm in it.
Vocal transformation.
Okay, let's just put that right on the downbeats.
Vocal transformation.
Bring that first note back in before it as well.
Vocal transformation.
Okay, we're getting somewhere now, I think.
Vocal transformation.
Okay, I can repeat that on each downbeat if I wanted to. Let's have a listen to this. Maybe the beat needs to be a bit faster.
Vocal transformation.
Let's take it up to 125. Now remember, because the audio file isn't being flex timed, it's not going to change in terms of its speed, but the MIDI behind it is.
Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation.
There's just a rhythm kind of emerging, which I could begin to play around with. Now, you can go to the ends of the earth in terms of processing this stuff. It would be possible for me to copy a different part of the phrase onto another track, tune it differently, apply different notes to it. I could add extra effects like reverbs and delays. I could find little moments that I could bounce down as new audio files and commit those so that they're effectively brand new printed files, where instead of this stuff being processed in real time as it is right now, effectively I could even create little sample libraries of different parts of my vocal phrase. And what this does is to immediately bring a pitched element to something which didn't start out life as a pitched element at all. It suddenly just got a flavor of its own. Now, what's really interesting about music production is that all of the time we sort of fall into the traps of thinking about how we might process a sound in ways that we've tried before. So for instance, the perfect example would be volume. Okay, I want a sound to fade in. Okay, well I can imagine a fade in right now. I could draw a volume line, and we've heard things fading in and out all of the time. We could think about applying filtering to a sound where we're changing the tone quality. But what we don't ever really do is to say, okay, well, I wonder what would happen if I played a musical phrase in the wrong key and then used pitch correction to put it into the right key. What would be the kind of tonal characteristics of doing that? Well, I know that I'm working in D. One thing I'm going to do is to just bring in a new little sequence sound. I'm going to just try this and see what happens. As we're experimenting with pitch, I'm going to open up Retro Synth. And what I'm going to do is to find a little sort of sequencery sort of sound. Let's see if we can find something that might work quite nicely through an arpeggiator, for instance. Remember, I'm in D, so what I want to do is to find something which maybe is going to be a little bit arpeggiated and a little bit interesting, and I'm going to deliberately play it in the wrong key, which is going to sound absolutely awful to start with. And let's just see what happens if I record it in, I don't know, let's say A. Let's go back to, or even A flat. That would be kind of even worse. Okay, I'm going to just record this little phrase just exactly as it comes out of the arpeggiator.
Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation.
Okay, I'm going to just quantize that so it starts absolutely in time. That sounds absolutely horrible. What I'm then going to do is to come down to the processors again for pitch, and I'm going to just come into Vocal Transformer, and I am going to select the Robotize option. I'm going to select a pitch base, well, of A2. I'm just going to leave that exactly as it is. But what I'm going to do is to say, okay, well, what happens when this becomes D? And what happens if we change the formant on it as well? So effectively, it's joining in with the pitch component of what I've done with the vocal, but what we're doing is we're sort of processing this fully from a pitch perspective outside of the normal synth parameters. What does it sound like? Okay, well that's kind of interesting. I'm going to change the formant again, but maybe what I'm going to do is to take this up a couple of octaves to the D above. Okay, so it's obviously really insistent, and it's got this kind of sort of series of undertones under the sound. I'm going to EQ it as well. I'm going to just filter this sound quite hard, so we're just getting the top end of it. And I'm also going to turn it down in volume. Let's just see how that sounds with the vocal.
Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. Vocal transformation. transformation, vocal transformation, vocal transformation, vocal.
Okay, and you never hear that. You never hear people sort of going, okay, well, what I want to do is to play in the wrong key and use pitch correction plugins to, in some way, sort of stretch or manipulate those sounds into the key that you're working in. And immediately there's just a different quality to it. You can hear that pitch correction is sort of desperately trying to be the original pitch and it's being forced into a new one. And it comes up with its own sort of tonal characteristics as a result. Again, immediately my mind is saying, okay, what might that sound like with a bit of tremolo moving from side to side, a bit of delay, a bit of reverb, and suddenly you're building a production in a completely different way with pitch at the center of it. So if you're not a singer, but you want to be able to work with pitched vocals, just try recording some spoken phrases, begin to experiment with what happens when you choose different notes, and start from that point building pitch choices around a completely new starting point for your productions.